What a fascinating conversation. Thank you, Tom. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our next session of today's State of Defense program. I'm Patrick Tucker with Defense One, Science and Technology Editor, and I am pleased to lead this discussion today as military operations extend deeper into contested and data-saturated space environments. The ability to sense and decide and act faster than an adversary is becoming more and more decisive. It is literally rocket science. But it is also an area that is moving much faster than the space race ever has before. It's increasingly diverse. U.S. Space Forces are now moving beyond isolated artificial intelligence pilots toward new enterprises that integrate AI across training, across testing, across operational infrastructure, new environment for launching, for both putting satellites in the air, distributing satellites is growing incredibly fast. In this conversation, we're going to explore how the Space Force is developing end-to-end frameworks for AI in space operations, spanning digital test ranges, synthetic training environments, mission systems. And to help guide this discussion, I am very pleased to welcome Colonel Corey Klopstein, Program Executive Officer for Operational Test and Training Infrastructure and Commander of System Delta 81. Colonel Klopstein, thank you for joining us. Am I pronouncing your name correctly, Colonel, by the way?
It is Colonel Klopstein, but that's okay. I get it both ways, but that's fine. Thank you, Patrick. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you. See, and that's the nice thing, because now you can just be Colonel. So first, tell us a little bit about what you do in the Space Force and what you're looking to do specifically this year.
Sure. So like you said, I'm Corey Klopstein. I'm the PEO for Operational Test and Training Infrastructure. Also the System Delta 81 Commander. I'm dual-hatted in those two roles. I'm out here in Los Angeles, in El Segundo. I'm actually sitting in the aerospace building here in El Segundo, just outside of our SCIF where we normally operate. I also have a team in Colorado Springs. So we have a small leadership team here in Los Angeles and a small footprint of our team just here in El Segundo. But then most of our team is in Colorado Springs. Operating out there as System Delta 81. So we as OTTI provide, a system of system capability for test and training that allows the Space Force to do full spectrum readiness. So what does that mean? That's I've got two T's in the name of our organization. So for tests, that means validating systems in a contested environment. So typically, in the past for space systems, we had tested them more on the developmental test side, just to ensure that they operated effectively in space and could survive in the space environment. Well, now we have to test those against an adversary and against threats. And so for us, that means validating that those systems can work in that contested environment. Similarly, on the training side, we've got to train our guardians to be able to react against a thinking adversary. And the space domain has evolved. And they've got to train to not just make sure that their systems are functioning, but to understand what's happening around those systems and across mission areas. And that's where OTTI comes in. We are here to provide that infrastructure so the Space Force can ensure full spectrum readiness, both across its systems and for its guardians. That's what readiness means for us.
Yeah. And it's hard to understate how rapidly this entire field is evolving and how quickly potential threats to U.S. space operations are proliferating, as are U.S. space capabilities. I remember, just sort of quick sidebar, I remember 10 years ago, I went with then's Commander of Space Force, General Hyten, out to Schriever Air Force Base, and he walked us through what at the time was the place that airmen were piloting the global positioning system. And it was a room like the size of a gym. It was like colder than every other room at the facility because you had to keep it cold because the actual computers that the airmen were working on were so hot because you couldn't swap them out. And most of the airmen that were managing the global positioning system at that time, 10 years ago, were younger than the computers they were working on. And they had to develop like new relationships with the actual GPS satellites because they had to know what that satellite was sort of like doing. They had to understand anomalies. And of course, a lot has changed since then, but one of the things that hasn't changed is that people, despite more attention from Hollywood, don't appreciate the value and importance of space, like the global positioning system, like our telecommunications infrastructure, not just to warfighting, but to everyday life. And so, Colonel, I wonder if you could talk a little bit, just from a very broad perspective, before we get into some of these more specific things that you're working on. How do you characterize right now the threat space of space, as it were, and what do you think that the American people need to appreciate about it?
Well, just like you talked about, the threat is evolving in space and it's evolving at a rapid rate. I mean, if you look at any of the news articles out there, there are plenty of examples of things where adversaries are acting either against our allies or against our satellites and our weapon systems. And so as that evolves, we also have to evolve the infrastructure to ensure that our guardians and our systems can, be ready for whatever threat is coming towards us. There are, real world examples of things that are happening right now where our guardians are participating in those real world operations and ensuring that we have the space systems available for our joint force so they can execute. When the joint force executes any kind of a mission, they need space effects to be able to be as effective as possible. And so, our guardians have to ensure that those systems are available at all times. And as the adversary is moving, they're trying to deny our ability to have those space effects. And that decreases the effectiveness of the joint force, which is why it's so imperative for us to ensure that we're getting the infrastructure in place so we can train our guardians and ensure that our systems are ready in case there's an evolving threat environment and adversaries trying to take our systems out.
Yeah, yeah, and to your point, this is something that we were talking about earlier. But Space Force is one of the unique services that it touches every other Latin command. It touches every other service. It touches every corner of the globe that the U.S. military is conducting operations, or to prevent the U.S. military from having to go conduct operations. And so, looking right now at CENTCOM and the headlines, and understanding that you don't play a specific role in Operation Epic Fury, but looking at it from the perspective of everything you just talked about, the need to train up to a current environment where intelligence and communications must be moving faster than like ever before because the threat is evolving faster. And that is life or death in terms of getting information from the ground to space, from space to the ground in order to ensure faster operations. When you look at what's going on now and the role that space plays in current operations, just from the perspective of a trainer and an observer and a professional, what are your thoughts in terms of what this operation reveals about the importance of space and also everything that you're doing at OTTI?
Well, I think what we plan to learn from this is how do our guardians and our systems interact in a real world event. So we're trying to take those real world events and apply them to building out the operational test and training infrastructure that our guardians need to ensure readiness. And so the way that we're doing that is through three LOEs. One is our digital environment. So this is replicating systems inside a digital environment to the greatest fidelity possible so that our guardians can get reps and sets on the systems and ensure that they hone their TTPs and understand how to react against a thinking adversary. And so when you talk about our digital environment, that is replicating our blue assets, replicating red assets, and then replicating gray models, commercial type of assets that are in that space environment, as well as visualizing the space domain. The second piece that we're doing is building out actually the physical or the live environment on the test and training range. So this is your more traditional type of space assets, whether that's, you're going to put something on orbit, you're going to replicate, a high value asset, you're going to try to replicate a threat asset, or you're going to put something on orbit that, observes what's going on either from a test or a training standpoint. So you have those two pieces, and then you really need to connect them if you want an LVC, live virtual constructive environment, to really conduct, more of a large force exercise. So you need the infrastructure that underpins both the digital environment and the physical environment so you can pass data back and forth between them. So it's the three LOEs that we're building out, the digital environment, the physical environment, and the infrastructure, so that we can make that realistic environment possible that we're experiencing right now in real world operations. And that way our guardians can work against that thinking adversary. We can have assets that we can, use in a live environment, and then we can pass that data back and forth so we can get those, two entities working together. The digital environment is really, really important for the Space Force, and here's why. You don't want to necessarily tip to your adversary the types of things that you would do in a scenario. And so replicating that in that digital environment is really vital for our guardians. there's OPSEC concerns, there's cost concerns, there are various other variables that are impacting us from being able to, and if you look at other domains going out to a live environment. And so replicating that digitally is really important, but also complementing that in the live environment is going to be important as well. And so, you can look at real world operations and then get a better understanding of what are the requirements that are driving the test and training infrastructure. And that's what's beneficial for us.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of those things that you're building out the Space Warfighter Operational Readiness Domain, the SWORD. Sometimes there actually are good acronyms, and that one actually works. So Brad, if you had a hand in that, in making that concise and direct.
I wish I could take credit, but there are smarter people than me that came up with it, so I'll give them credit.
That is a good one. Usually I have to, rebrand things, and then, PO yells at me, and then eventually they're like, that's good, it's a good title. But SWORD, Space Warfighter Operational Readiness Domain. You guys are migrating that to the cloud. What are the plans for that? What is that? And what will extending that to the cloud mean in terms of space operational awareness and operation?
So if I could take a step back on SWORD first to describe more of the general vision of what we would like to do, from a training standpoint, and then I'll talk more specifically about SWORD and the capabilities. So our intention long term is to replicate things that we do in other domains. So if you think about, we're sons and daughters of the Air Force, right? So if you think about the air domain, if you've got, a fighter squadron or bomber squadron that are at a base, they've got what we call a backyard range, and they're able to fly with an airspace that is close in proximity to where their home station is. So that's kind of the backyard range that they use. And then when they need to do a large force exercise, they'll go to a place like the Nevada Test and Training Range or the Utah Test and Training Range or Eglin to be able to work across mission areas, fighters, bombers, air refuelers. Well, we're trying to do the same thing for the Space Force. Build out backyard ranges, but also have the ability to do the large force exercises. And so for the backyard range, the way that we envision it is this. We build, a trainer, a mission system trainer that replicates the operational system to the max extent possible. We've not typically done that in the Space Force. What we've done is we've invested in replications of those operational systems. What we want to do going forward is we actually work with the development contractor so that they can replicate that mission system in a training mode and have a training string on the ops floor. Now, here's where SWORD comes in. SWORD brings the space war to that mission trainer at the backyard range. So it's the simulation back end that is working as the Guardian is interacting with its operational console and providing the effects that the Guardian may or may not be able to see. It may be, transparent to them, but they're able to conduct their training in whatever scenarios that they need to conduct them. But we're providing that the blue models that are replicating potentially other systems, the red models that are replicating threats, and we're doing that in the back end of that simulation environment. And so we want to be able to bring that to the ops, and then we're also using that for space flags. It is a tool that the 392nd actually started developing several years ago, and our program office partnered with the 392nd Combat Training Squadron, which is Delta 11 at Space Training and Readiness Command. And we worked very closely with them to be able to use that starting point and then start building out on it. We've awarded several contracts this year to enhance the capabilities of SWORD. And we anticipate that as the distributed training backbone for the Space Force going forward. Now, you talked about deploying this to the cloud. There's a couple reasons why we want to do that. If you want to enable not just a backyard range, but access from multiple points, you need that to be cloud-based. So if you want to have developers, for example, sitting out here at Spaceden and El Segundo, logging into SWORD, while we have Guardians logging into SWORD at Building 24 at Schriever, while we potentially have Guardians logging into SWORD down at Kirtland on the ops floor, or maybe out in DC with our mission partners, you need that to be cloud-based. And so we are working to get that so that if you've got the right networks, you got the right connectivity, you can access that tool to be able to conduct any type of training event or maybe even an exercise. Additionally, we need to get to the cloud so that we can get to the right classification level and develop at the right classification level the replications of the blue models and the red models within SWORD. So it's kind of a two-step process. That's the near-term thing that we're doing, is getting it into a SAP environment so that we can actually develop the right level, security level type of models within SWORD. And then the second step would be, how do we get this remotely accessible for Guardians if they've got the right connectivity?
Yeah. So, because I'm trying to conceptualize what a space war game is, and obviously you need to distribute it to any of the potential players so that they can access it by the cloud is important. But in my mind, I have an image of like a 1980s arcade game, and there's little objects sort of like floating around in space. But actually, this is an incredibly data-rich environment full of very deeply classified information that has to be replicated in a way to recreate potential space operation, which is like literal rocket science. Give me a sense of like what are these virtual trainings sort of like, and what is it like from like a data perspective? Trying to recreate all of space, or at least low Earth orbit, or perhaps geo Earth orbit, within a digital environment, so that folks can log on and actually test their maneuvers, their skills, their operations in a way that's actually credible. It sounds actually like enormous, almost incomprehensibly, except we still have to stick it on a cloud.
So I hope it's not incomprehensibly enormous. Otherwise, that's a bridge too far. But I think what you're talking about is enabling the high performance computing that actually is the backbone of what we need to do. Whether that's data management, data tagging, and ensuring that we're hosting the data at the right security level. So, like I talked about earlier, that is our infrastructure team that is working that. One of the challenges when it comes to managing data is something that we've seen with the joint simulation environment, which is if you're trying to pass massive amounts of data over multiple nodes, you have challenges there. And so that's one of the things that you asked about challenges. It's probably one of the biggest challenges when it comes to managing the data. It's both having it at the right classification level and making sure that we can pass only the data that we need to enable the exercises or training events or test events that are required for the Space Force. And so that's why our infrastructure team is focused on understanding what are the right tools, how do we get the right enterprise type of technical capabilities in place, and ensure that they're complementary across both operational, test, and training environments for the Space Force.
Yes, well, you guys are also building out, as you mentioned, this actual physical space. There's a national testing range. It's a $98 million effort aimed at advancing physical and digital infrastructure for the NSTTC. So from a pure defense perspective, what are the major sort of technical breakthroughs that you expect to come out of having this range? And what are the challenge is to building digital twins and space environments that also correspond to actual physical things on the ground?
So the effort that you're talking about is our Nightstar IDIQ that we've been working on. We released a NOCA for Nightstar a few weeks ago. Our intent is to get our RFP out by the end of the month, and the team is working to award that contract this summer. And what we want to do with Nightstar is establish a pool of vendors that will support the physical live environment development. So here's what we've done for OTTI to date. We have employed any novel acquisition mechanism at our fingertips to deliver capabilities at speed. That is a good strategy in the short term. It's not necessarily a sustainable strategy in the long term. And so what we want to ensure that we put in place is not just using things like our commercial solutions opening that we awarded in 2025, and we've been very successful in getting areas of interest out and awarding contracts. We've awarded tens of millions of dollars of contracts on that vehicle, and we're going to have more coming here in the near future. We also have used the Space Enterprise Consortium, other transaction authority for very specific purposes. But we want those to be feeders to larger efforts. And one of those larger efforts would be the Nightstar IDIQ, for example, which would be a foundational contract for the physical live environment. Similarly, we've got an IDIQ for the infrastructure that we awarded in 2025. That's the Ascend 2. And then we're working on other transaction authority for the digital environment here in 2026, hopefully to award that by the end of the year, to support a software acquisition pathway for the digital environment. So that's the contractual kind of foundation that we're putting in place. We want to have those key LOE contracts for digital, physical, and infrastructure, and then we want to use things like our CSO or OTAs to be able to feed those to deliver capabilities quickly. Now, you'd mentioned some of the technologies that we want to see through Nightstar. Here's what we've seen to date. There are commercial capabilities out there that we want to be able to leverage in a different way for test and training. We've seen some opportunities through the Space Enterprise Consortium, and we've leveraged range as a service type of capabilities through commercial vendors. We want to see more of that going forward. In parallel, we're also developing purpose-built type of capabilities that we're going to have on orbit. And then the final thing I'll say that we want from Nightstar is maturation of our range control system. So we've done some of the development for a range control system on Spec OTA. We're going to do more of that going into 26 and 27. But we want the ability to control our purpose-built satellites and then interact with commercial assets. An example of interacting with commercial assets, we used the range of service contract recently, working with our Space Domain Awareness Delta in Combat Forces Command to coordinate, a movement of a commercial satellite so they can observe it from the ground. And they use that movement to help with a training event and to modify some of their tactics, techniques, and procedures. And so those are the kind of assets we want to bring to bear to Combat Forces Command so that we can hone, our Guardians' expertise and help them do whatever training events are required so they're ready for the threat environment.
Yeah, that seems like in thinking about how you simulate like space war games, I think that this is something that presents a challenge that maybe a lot of people don't appreciate, because you sort of think that like, oh, Russia and China and the United States might have an incident in space, but really it's crowded up there, and you have to simulate the behavior of commercial assets that are increasingly proliferated. And some of them you have a relationship, and then there's some of them that you might not. So it just sounds. It strikes me that it's much less of like a three-body problem, and it sounds more like the high seas around the Caribbean in like 1890. Like, just very briefly, can you talk to me a little bit about how you simulate the existence of proliferated space assets when you think about how to train for a war game against a specific adversary?
So coming back to you touched on this in the previous question, and it relates to what you're talking about right now. And I didn't answer it previously, but you talked about models, and what are the challenges with building models and ensuring that we've got the right models. So one things that what you asked is, how do we ensure that we've got accurate models within our environments so it's replicating the space domain effectively. For us, that means building the right standards that are going to help create those models, whether blue or red, that will integrate into our environments. When I took over in late 2023, early 2024, I knew that the digital environment was going to be a priority, and it was something that we needed to accelerate the development of. And we needed to decide what were the synthetic environments that these types of capabilities needed to be integrated into. And so for digital, we chose SWORD, like we talked about, as the distributed training environment. So at a low to medium fidelity type of asset that would be integrated into it. And then we chose JSC for space, partnering with the JSC program office for something that's more high fidelity, maybe more on the test side and tactics validation side. But really the important thing for us is making sure that we define those environments, define the standards that can integrate capabilities into those environments, and then get that out to industry and the other program executive officers and other program offices so that when they're building assets, they're building replications of satellites, they're making their new developments, or they're building their training strings for their ground systems, that they understand the standards to build to. And we're working closely with our SSIO office to ensure that integration across the PEOs, and working closely with SQ on that. It is a challenge, but it's that we've had continual communication and collaboration with the other PEOs, and I think we've been successful today.
Yeah, and you guys also have a lot of collaboration and discussion with a new and very rapidly emerging private space industry, which is not a thing that was a factor a few years ago, but is a huge factor now. And you touched on it a little bit. What are you when you look out across this industry that's emerging? And it's a fascinating industry to cover, but the long-term financing for a space startup is, even from a VC perspective, it's tricky, but they are like growing. It's a really it's a fascinating field for VCs to try and fund into, but it's very touch and go. There's not a lot of people that think that they're buying stuff from space. So what are the major trends that you are seeing out of the commercial startup space, particularly in terms of the things you talked about, modeling and simulation, and even AI? And how do you envision working? You mentioned a couple of them. There's OTAs, there's some, get on base contracts, faster contracting. But how do you envision working with some of those new startups that are part of the new space industry in some of these efforts going forward?
Okay, so yeah, there's a lot there. So let me try to parse it out effectively and try to answer each of the aspects of the question. So I think, like, first, from an OTTI standpoint, we tried to engage with industry on a regular basis. When we started up, our intent was to do this on a quarterly basis, and our eyes were bigger than our stomach at that point. We just didn't have the bandwidth to be able to engage that regularly with industry. We have gotten more people on board as of last summer, and we're able to get more to that cadence with them. So we had one industry engagement in September, which was very good. We had another one went through Spec OTA in January. We had a pitch day, and then we just had one last week out in Colorado Springs. And so we want to continue that discussion with industry to ensure that we're pulling in whatever capabilities are out there and incorporating them quickly into the infrastructure so that we can fill gaps both on the test and training side. So that is our intent, to have, a regular dialogue with industry. As far as trends, there are a lot more companies that are coming into the orbits that we are interested in that have not been there in the past. And really, just over the past couple of years, there have been more companies that are proving out capabilities, whether that's in LEO or in GEO, that we can take advantage of. And so I see us expanding, as we go forward, more test and training assets on the commercial side, because I think there will be more available for us. And I think there's models that we're proving out for ranges of service to be able to go to those commercial capabilities, bring them into the architecture, use them for a specific purpose, but we don't need to retain those assets. We can pay for that service, and the commercial carrier can retain the asset. And then the last thing you talked about was AI. So, I want to touch on that real quick, because, a lot of people talk about AI, but for OTTI in particular, it is very, very important for our architecture. And here's why. You have guardians that, when they test or train or when they operate a system, they go and sit down in a console. And, it's not like other domains where you've got an operator that needs to be in a cockpit or specifically on a physical range or maybe having a handheld weapon, things like that. It is, we sit down at a computer console and we operate our system. And so what we want to be able to provide from an AI standpoint is that replication in the background, that simulation environment in the background, so that when a guardian sits down in a console, they don't need someone on the other side to be able to interacting with them to, execute some sort of a training scenario. And that's why AI is important for us, because we think that we can use AI to replicate the behaviors of systems in the background for guardians so that they can sit down in any console on their ops floor and through, initial qualification training all the way up to, something that's closer to a large force exercise, they can do that in their backyard ranges. That is our goal. So what we want to be able to enable is that the AI type of capability that's working in the background that shows this is how a blue asset is interacting with a gray asset, is potentially interacting with a red threat. One of the things that we worked on recently on SWORD was a partnership with the 57th in Delta 11, that's the Space Aggressor Squadron. And we worked with Slingshot to develop a tool called Talos. And that tool allows the, one aggressor to execute functions of multiple aggressors at a time. And so it's a force multiplier as a start, for them to be more effective in a space flag. But it is a stepping stone to us being able to replicate systems autonomously in the background so that we can support what I talked about, the vision of guardians being able to sit down in a console and they can plug in a scenario and interact with that scenario without having aggressors or even, range operators sitting on the other side and interacting with them, from a human standpoint.
When you think about the AI tools that you need that industry might help provide, it strikes me that the deep degree of very specialized knowledge that guardians have about this stuff, the high level of classification of the data, it's not necessarily an appropriate fit for some out of the box consumer facing large language model like frontier model that is probably pretty good at writing term papers but might not be well suited to specificity of what your mission is, and especially the credibility level. Do you are you seeing the rise of AI companies that are kind of specific to some of the space training that you're talking about? Or are you seeing the rise of companies that can help you create it? Like, do you guys have to, because you're the ones with the data, you're the ones who understand your own compute hardware, you're building it out with Sword, and you understand the classification of how important this stuff is and how to distribute it. You kind of have to make these AIs yourself with help from industry, or are you seeing folks come in with something out of the box that's appropriate for you?
So I'm gonna give you the it depends answer, and then give you a couple of different examples. So for SSC and for the Space Force, we're trying to employ an AI strategy that covers three different things: a foundational type of aspect of applying AI, a functional aspect, and then mission specific. So foundational is, if I'm going to come into my computer, log in, I'm going to use Outlook, or I'm going to use PowerPoint. You want to be able to have AI tools that are there to help you to perform day-to-day tasks. The way that I think of this is, if you've got a transcript of a meeting and you want to have a summary of that meeting, you use Gen AI to give you a summary of that meeting. Then you've got something that's more functional. So specific to acquisitions, for example, we need to reference the Federal Acquisition Regulation, or we need to reference statute, or we need to reference a request for proposal that was built that's similar to an effort that we're trying to do right now. If you can help with decision making and use a large language model to extract information and optimize what you're trying to do, that speeds up the process. And so what you want to be able to do is use AI from a functional standpoint to go, okay, I've got RFPs that have done software development in the past. What are the best examples of that? Is it applicable to something I'm going to do in the future? How do I extract the pertinent information and then apply it to what I need to do? Or we're working with the test community to bring in a tool that helps them build test evaluation management plans, so TEMPs. And those are documents that can be difficult to build. But if you've got something in a database that helps you auto-populate at least aspects of it as a starting point, and then you can modify it on the edges, that helps decision-making and helps functional expertise on a day-to-day basis. And then the last one that I think that you're referencing more is the mission-specific type of AI. So I talked about what we did with the 57th and Space Aggressor Squadron. I think there are more applications going forward for OTTI, whether that's working with the 98th and helping them, understand how to bring in the commercial tools and modify them specifically for that mission-specific purpose of, replicating a blue asset or a red asset, or potentially, complementing operations in the future. So there are multiple examples that we're using across Space Systems Command to implement AI per the direction of the Secretary. And the goal is to optimize decision making and make our Guardians more efficient. It doesn't matter whether that's just doing a day-to-day task or that's conducting operations. We're trying to implement that across the spectrum.
Yeah. This is when I talk to folks and they're very anti AI because they're reading recent comments from some Silicon Valley megafauna that they somehow feel alienated by. I like to remind them, just you can talk to people in the military about because they're more risk averse than anybody when it comes to something going wrong with a machine, but they're taking the time to make an investment in the relationship. And it's building up that relationship with artificial intelligence that's going to give you the confidence to use this to do exactly as you said, optimize your own decision making. And that's crucially important because your adversary is going to do it too. So you have to do it better than them, but you also have to keep your human autonomy and accountability. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I've talked about models, and so what's important for us is that you're grounding your model in something that's realistic. And so I'm going to come back to the broader OTTI architecture and reference the three LOEs for us. Just using AI as an example, if your model is accurate, then you can trust what's happening on the other side. But your model is only accurate if you're able to replicate what you want to do in a live environment and bring that data back into your digital environment to make it more accurate. And so if it is accurate and it is a source of truth, then you can use it in an effective way. If it's not accurate, then you are susceptible to potential hallucinations from an AI standpoint. So that's why you got to complement those things, and you can't just blindly trust it. You've got to test it, and the best way for us to test it is in a test and training environment.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. And it also speaks to an asset that is a critical part of the AI revolution that a lot of people don't appreciate, and that is human domain expertise, which is the thing that you're actually trying to virtualize and build up. It plays an important role in helping human beings build these exact relationships and develop the AI that's actually going to be useful to them. It's not just an out of the box, like all of a sudden the thing is a brilliant thing. It is a
Right.
reflection of the amount of work and effort and also human domain knowledge that goes into making it useful. So
And the
along those
way,
lines, I wanted
just
to ask you. Go ahead.
real quick, the way that we were able to implement exactly what you talked about was bringing our aggressors in and having them sit next to the software developers that brought the AI tool to bear and explain to them what they, had observed or anticipated would be the right types of behavior of the threat model that they were replicating via AI. And so, like, if you have those two entities together, you can get to something that's functional and applicable in the right environment. If you don't have that resident expertise, like you're talking about, then yeah, you do risk not having something that can be used from an AI standpoint.
Yeah. When was this, and how good did the aggressors do? Did they clean everybody's clocks? Like I love it when aggressors get involved. It's always like but some of my favorite folks are the aggressors. But yeah, when
So
did that happen? What was the main thing you took away from it?
we implemented that in Space Flag 26-2.
Mm-hmm.
That was a large force exercise. That was over 800 personnel. It was a joint exercise. I think one of the big things that we learned, this was just a step into the direction of being able to replicate something. One of the things that we learned was, like I just emphasized, is if you have the actual aggressors sitting with the developers and building that capability, that's going to be the thing that's going to be most effective. It optimized, the aggressors that we have. So we've got, not the biggest aggressor force right now. And so bringing tools in to help them be more efficient in these flags is really useful.
Yeah, yeah. So did you just real quick? Did you sort of like A/B tested? Did you have folks that were part of an aggressor programmer team versus folks that were just programmer team and just aggressors, or really? Because now I'm just very curious. Like, how did that work? Did you see like, oh, without the aggressor on the team, they performed this well, but with the aggressor on the team, they perform much better? Or
Yes, that's it. Exactly right. So it was, in this case, it was one aggressor could perform multiple tasks where previously they would have to do those one by one serially. So it was multiple tasks at one time. So they were able to do more in the exercise. And we're going to continue to build on that as we go forward.
fascinating. See, AI is not going to take your job. Go be an aggressor. Go be a guardian aggressor. That's kind of the cool. That's a pretty cool title. If you're looking for a job out there, I don't know. So one of the things I also wanted to ask you on is working with partner militaries, because this is also part of the reason to build out these joint environments and do all of this testing. We've got a lot of partner militaries. It's a huge asset to the United States, and by trying to build out data environments where you can give them data at the appropriate level of classification and get data from them at the appropriate level of classification, do so rapidly. Every command is struggling with how to do this at the scale that they want to do it. So, can you talk to me a little bit about how OTTI is partnering with other militaries and trying to plug them into the enterprise space training systems? What are your near-term expectations there or goals?
So I would just say that we are reliant on our allies to be able to conduct any type of joint force employment, and so it's critical for us to bring them in early on and ensure that we're partnering with our allies and taking into consideration their requirements. What we want to do from an OTTI standpoint is allow the flexibility of our infrastructure. So we talked about different types of systems at different classification levels. It is imperative for us to build our infrastructure effectively so that we can parse data the right way and we can give the right permissions to the guardians, whether that's of our U.S. forces or allied forces, so they can work together in the test and training infrastructure. And we're trying to build that up front. And we've got strong partnerships with our allies. I know that even Combat Forces Command, we've got some allied partners on the staff there that we work with. So it is going to be really important for us to ensure that it's built in and baked in from the start, and we're ensuring that there's flexibility in the system to bring in different partners, based on what we need for whatever exercises we have.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that there's a lot of right now. NATO, U.S.-led NATO exercises that are showcasing the importance of, for instance, partners in Eastern Europe and Ukraine, and helping the U.S. and NATO members stand up the sort of deterrence that's relevant to 21st century conflict. So these international partnerships are pretty key. They're a real asset, and so it's great to hear that there's room and hunger to get them involved in a way that's going to help create the actual credible deterrence and response to space operations that are going to keep the lights on and keep the GPS running, keep the U.S. Forces moving where they need to move. But Colonel, I think we have talked for so much longer, but we're actually out of time today. So I wanted to thank you, Colonel Klopstein, for joining me today. Best to you and everyone at OTTI. I'd love to go out and see some of these work games sometime. But please keep us updated as these efforts advance. And congratulations on everything you've done this year and are doing this year. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you, Patrick. I really appreciate it. Appreciate the time. Love talking about what I think is the coolest mission in the Space Force. So thank you very much.
As we wrap up this installment of our State of Defense series focused on the state of the Air Force and the Space Force, I want to sincerely thank all of our speakers and each of you for joining us today. We'll be sharing the on-demand recording so you can revisit the insights from today's conversations or share them with colleagues. Continuing these discussions across the defense community helps deepen understanding of the challenges and opportunities shaping the future of air and space power. Please join us tomorrow for the final installment of the State of Defense series as we continue examining the forces shaping the future of national defense. For Defense One, I'm Patrick Tucker. Thank you for tuning in.